Alrighty, so I want to thank you guys for coming. This is mock kickoff in session 4. So if this was not what you were looking for, you are in the wrong room. To start off, my name is Farrell. I am a mentor for FRC team 433. Infinite Recharge 2020 will be my 13th season in FIRST. I started out as a student on 433. During my time on the team, I was primarily a programmer, and I was also the vice president for 2 years. After I graduated from Firebirds, I spent my college years mentoring Team 4637, which is the Bambi Bots from St. Hubert's. And then since graduating in 2016, I have been back mentoring Firebirds. I'm now actually currently the robotics teacher at Mount St. Joseph Academy, which is where Firebirds are from. Basically, the point of this presentation is that I am a huge FRC history buff. I love looking at FIRST robots. I love knowing teams. I love learning about their histories. I love seeing how the history of FIRST games can help in planning for future games. So I've spent a lot of time over the last 13 years learning as much as I can so that I can bring that back to my team and now share with all of you. One last thing before I get really into the nuts and bolts of this presentation is if you have any questions, feel free to email me. My email's up there. It's hfarrell, Farrell 15@gmail.com. I love helping teams. I love answering questions. So feel free. It doesn't need to be. It can be mock kickoff related. It can be team dynamics related. Before I was working as a teacher, I was actually senior mentor for Eastern PA, so I know a lot about doing like inter-team stuff and all those fun things. All right. So what is mock kickoff? Basically, all of you in this room should know what kickoff is. It's the first Saturday in January that kicks off the new FRC season when the new game's announced. Typically, teams gather on kickoff to analyze the game and kind of start making decisions on how they want to compete in the season. And a lot of times teams are getting together, and for many of the students, it's their first time sort of seeing a game up close and starting the design process and figuring out what the team is going to do. About 6 years ago, I started to find that what was happening on 433 was that our discussions were really being divided into two groups of kids. We had the kids that were returning students and they knew what they were talking about, and they would go off and they would form their own little discussion groups. And then we would have the new students and the new parents and the new mentors who would kind of just like stand to the side, and they wouldn't participate, and they'd be afraid to kind of give their answers and because they were worried that they didn't know what they were talking about. And I kind of realized that that was because we were really speaking different languages. When you've seen an FRC game, when you've been through an FRC season, you learn terminology, you learn sort of how things work in a way that someone who is brand new doesn't know. And so if you're not speaking the same language, it can feel like people aren't keeping up with what they want to do. And so my solution to that was we started having what are called mock kickoffs, and that's what today's presentation about is explaining what mock kickoffs are about. So typically what we do on 433 is in the fall we do these presentations called mock kickoffs, which are a way to get all the student members together and show them a game that they've never seen before and treat it like it's kickoff. It gives them a chance to kind of see something that they're not familiar with. It gives everyone a chance to learn about the terminology, to get on the same page, so that when actual kickoff comes around, we're all prepared to tackle the challenge together. It really is, the benefit that I really enjoy is that it's not just a benefit for the new members. I have a senior sitting in the room who has been through 3 mock kickoffs, soon to be 4, and so instead of just having 4 years of experience, she's been exposed to at least 7 games, right? Like of different ideas and different ways of playing things. Because what you'll find as you watch FRC games over a really long period of time is that there's a lot of things and themes that come up every so often. They're not each game isn't as unique as you think it is overall. Okay, so do mock kickoffs actually help? you know, that's the question in all your minds. Is this something that we really should be investing time in? And I'm not saying that it's going to be a catch-all fix. I'm not saying that it's going to be like, oh, like we didn't do mock kickoffs before and now we do and we're winning all of the district events. No, but what I have broken down is that on the left side of the chart is kind of my time in Firebirds before we started doing more of the strategic analysis pre-season of getting everybody on the same page, and then post 2015 is when we started doing the mock kickoffs. And what I found is, and I actually haven't done a lot of this like self-introspection before putting this presentation together, is as a team on average, pre-2015, we were primarily, when we were making the limbs, we were making the limbs as a second pick. We were not captaining, we were not, you know, most of these years, especially like 2010 through 13, you see that like I have like one like eliminations appearance listed. That's out of like 4 events that we went to those seasons. So like of the 4 events that we were playing at that season, we were in the eliminations once. And so something had to give. We needed to start thinking more strategically in our decisions. And so since enacting the trying to get better every year in mock kickoffs and stuff, we've been a captain pretty much every year. We've made eliminations at both of our district events. It's not an automatic fix, but it is a nice way to just be getting better every year. So that's my kind of spiel. Okay, basically, a lot of the premises in this presentation are going to be talking about kind of how you guys are hopefully already approaching kickoff, because when I thought about setting out the way to explain what a mock kickoff is, I really figured I should talk about how we approach breaking down games in general. At our mock kickoff events, the first thing I always do is I make sure that the kids understand that when you break apart a first game, when you see a first game for the first time, these are the types of ideas that you should be looking into, right? Every first game is going to break down into objectives. You know, you're going to have offensive ways to score points, you're going to have defensive ways to score points. You want to make sure that you're paying attention to how the system works. Usually, typically, FRC games are, you know, win-loss tie, but sometimes you get a game like 2010 where actually your ranking point was directly tied to the score of the losing alliance. So it was really beneficial to have that in mind and think about. So you want to make sure that when you're going through the games and reading through the rules that you're paying attention for like little catches like that might be different than what you would normally think about. Whenever you start categorizing scoring into tasks, make sure that you're thinking about the ratio of the points scored to the ease of execution. So like everyone has a pretty good idea of how to break down, you know, ways to score points. The nuance kind of comes from being able to say, okay, like I want to score all the cargo, to being like, okay, if I want to score cargo on the cargo ship level, you know, the lowest level is going to give me 12 open spots to score cargo. If I want to score on the lowest level and the middle level, that only gives me, you know, 16 spots total, and start to think about like how much you're giving up in terms of design space in order to do each of those objectives. Remember to keep in mind that multiple actions might be required to do one task. The thing I always say about this is that, you know, controlling a game piece is not just intaking and then scoring. Typically it's intaking, storage, transport, and then scoring. So it's important to think about those components when you are ranking tasks. Okay. This is my, if you guys take one thing away from this presentation, I'm hoping that it's this slide. To me, this is those improvements that you saw in Firebird's record is really because we have gotten a lot better at understanding the idea of the, you know, the golden rule, which is that if you have, say, 40 man-hours available to build your robot, and you can either have each robot sub-mechanism can have, you know, at most 10 units of manpower. It is so much better to have just 4 subunits that are each operating at a 10 out of 10 than it is to have, say, 8 subunits that are each running at like a 5 out of 10. Being realistic about what your team's capabilities are, and I can't give you an answer about what each of your individual team's capabilities are. It really is kind of like you have to be sort of look realistically at yourselves and what you're capable of. A really great example of this is that during our 2019 design session, Firebirds came down to the decision that we said that based off of our resources and what we had available in terms of manpower, that we could either score on the top levels of the rocket or score on the third step. And so we needed to have a discussion as a team about which one of those we wanted to prioritize. And what ended up happening was that we decided that in terms of valuing the ranking points, being able to secure that third step climb would ultimately benefit us more than having to do the rocket by ourselves, because we figured that as events went on, at early events, the third step was going to be more valuable because we thought lots of people weren't going to be able to do the rocket, and then at later events, we would have partners who could do the rocket, and so that kind of drove our design decisions. Okay, so ideally, first robots are simple and efficient. You need to maximize your scoring potential while minimizing points of failure. A lot of this comes down to you want to make sure that your robot is doing the most it can without biting off. Like, it comes back to that being mindful of your team's capabilities. You want to make sure that you don't do more subsystems than you can handle. Something I talk about a lot is the idea of thinking about what other robots you might play with and face in throughout the season. That came up with when we had our discussion about what partners we thought we were going to have in terms of being able to do the rocket versus third step climbing. We thought it was far more likely that we would have partners who were capable of doing the higher levels of the rocket than it was to have partners that were capable of doing the third step climb. Ultimately, that turned out to be true. We ended up seating 4th at our first district event, primarily because we were one of very few third step climbers at the event. Even though we had the slowest third step climb in MAR, it was still better to have the slowest third step climber than no climber at all. Let's see. Okay, another thing I want to go over quickly, that when you are designing your mock kickoff type events, you want to emphasize the importance of prototyping. You want to, even if it's just something where when you're doing a mock kickoff, you're including an element of it where you're asking kids to kind of prototype quickly to a game they've never seen. I like to look for wow, look at this moments. Those are kind of when you take a couple pieces of cardboard and an axle and some bearings and a drill, and you get something working in like 30 minutes. It's not the what's going to be on the final robot. It's really, you're looking for proof of concept. You're looking for like, wow, this is cool. Who knew this was going to work? After you have those look at this moments, you want to iterate. You don't want to settle on the first design you get. You also don't want to settle on a design just because like you're attached to it. You want to make sure that you are picking designs that are based in data, are based in kind of strong design principles. Okay, so you want to utilize materials that you commonly find. We use a lot of CAD, cardboard aided design on 433, a lot of plastic, wood, PVC, basically anything that you can use to mock something up quickly. You also want to try to design variability into your prototypes, but you want it to be controlled variability, right? You want it to be something where if you are testing the, compliance of a shooter, you want to be able to move that compression incrementally and be able to write down, okay, with a ½ inch of compression, these are the results we got. With, an inch of compression, these are the results we got. You want to be able to have it be in such a way that you have, you're only ever looking at one variable at a time. Even if your prototype itself has many variables that can be controlled, you want to be focusing in so that you can get consistent data. And then I always include this picture because it's really important to not just test under ideal conditions. A lot of times when kids are prototyping, you know, you'll run it through a couple times where, you know, someone will, especially like roller intakes, someone will roll the ball in and then the intake sucks it up and you're like, yes, it works, awesome. Or, you know, and you never bother to like test what that does in front of a bumper. Or you don't test how it reacts if like the ball is rolling away from you and you're driving towards it. You want to make sure that you are testing under as many conditions as you can. This is an example of our 2018 intake on an actual like carpet dolly, weighed down and being pushed around as if it's a robot so that we can test to see how the intake worked against different orientations of cubes. Okay, so this is the part here. So typically in a mock kickoff, when you are setting up a mock kickoff for your team, what you want to do is you want to find a game that has already happened but has not been experienced by any of the students in the room, because you want everyone to benefit from the learning experience. Typically I go back and will pull from a game that's usually somewhere between like 7 or 8 years removed from the students, because sometimes I would run into problems with kids who had older siblings that played the game that we were doing, and then they would be like, oh, I remember this one, and all the robots did this. When I'm setting up a mock kickoff presentation, what I do is I start out with the slides that you just saw. I go through all of these ideals with the kids so that they're all on the same page, and then I present to them the game, which is what I'm going to do with you guys right now. Usually in a mock kickoff, you would give them like a half hour to analyze the game after watching the game animation. In small groups, I like to let them discuss. I like to usually give them like a subset of the rules so that they can really dive into it. We're a little bit more squished on time, so I think I'm gonna limit how much we're gonna discuss in small groups, but I do still want you guys to discuss in small groups. So this is the game we're gonna be talking about today, which is Overdrive, which I'm just interested if any of the mentors in the room played Overdrive, or if this is gonna be the first time everybody's seeing this. Anybody? It was 2008 for reference. FRC 2008 Overdrive. Oh, this is gonna be fun. Okay. All right, I played this game. This was my freshman year of high school.
What time do we live?
Oh god, the game animation. Oh wait, this one? Oh.
Coach and a new position, the robo-coach. The center of the track is spanned by the overpass, which is 6.5 feet above the floor. A 6-foot-tall lane divider runs down the midline of the track. The two structures help define the finish lines on the red and the blue lanes of the track. The game pieces for First Overdrive are 40-inch diameter inflatable balls known as track balls. There are 2 for each alliance. The objective of Overdrive is to have each alliance move their robots and trackballs around the track as rapidly as possible and gain points each time they cross their finish line. Bonus points are earned every time a trackball passes over the overpass. Robo-coach stations are located at the corners of the track. Robots start the match lined up against their alliance wall. Starting positions for the trackballs are randomly determined before each match. The match starts with hybrid mode, when robots can autonomously navigate around the field and gather points for each line they cross. Alliances will also get a bonus for each of their trackballs that is removed from the overpass before the hybrid period ends. During the hybrid period, the robo-coaches can pass signals to the robots to give them cues to alter their gameplay. At the end of hybrid period, the human players step forward to take control of the robots. As teleoperated period starts, robots continue to race around the track and score points each time they cross their own finish line. When overtaking slower machines, robots can signal a desire to pass by gently bumping. Robots can move track balls around the field by bumping and hurting them. Or the track balls can be captured and possessed. Track balls score each time they cross their own finish line. 2 points for going under the overpass, 8 points for going over. Robots will have to be built robustly to avoid damage from falling track balls. Track balls placed back on the overpass at the end of the match will earn a special 12-point bonus. Of course, they have to stay there. Good luck, and we'll see you at the competitions.
This is like cars. Wait, 2008 was the year. There you go.
Alright, guys, so congratulations, you just traveled back in time. It is January 6th, 2008. Your team is super excited to be playing First Overdrive, and you're now back at your team's kickoff. So to start off with, we're going to talk a little bit about how the scoring breaks down for this game, and then I want you guys in your small groups at your tables to kind of discuss what your first thoughts are, what you think, you know, sort of the game, what you think the general strategies are going to be, what the meta is going to be, and then comes the really fun part, because, you know, since this is a time machine, we get to skip to the end, and we get to talk about what actually ended up happening with those robots. You get to see where those decisions actually led for real teams, and who was left holding the trophy at the end of the season. So as the video said, there's two parts of Overdrive. There is the hybrid mode, which is autonomous, and then teleop. The reason it is called hybrid mode is because there were not human players in 2008. There were instead robot coaches, which were, they did not hold up signs like the video suggests. I wish they did. It's actually somehow weirder than that. They held up like TV remotes, like IR, like infrared TV remotes, and that was how you were able to send signals to your robot during autonomous to change paths. Yeah. So during hybrid period, robots earned 4 points each time it crossed its own finish line. So that was the red and blue line that was on the dividing the field. So you got 4 points in hybrid auto for crossing the finish line. You got 4 points for crossing one of the lane markers, which was the like side pieces. So if you could go from where you started off, which was in this corner, you got 4 points for crossing this line and 4 points for crossing your finish line each time you went around the circle. During teleop, you got 2 points for crossing the finish line. If you cross the finish line, oh, you can't, so the next bullet point's just saying that you can't go in like a clockwise rotation. You can't go backwards and just run across the finish line like that. Right. You had to go in the circle. You had to go like a racetrack. Track balls are associated with the entire alliance, so it didn't matter who scored the track ball. Another part of this is that this is one of those games where if you're a red robot and you accidentally pick up a blue ball and you shoot the blue ball over the blue overpass, it doesn't matter that you're a red robot. Congratulations, you just scored 8 points for the other alliance. So the track ball's colors were associated with the alliances, not necessarily with the robot that scored them. Track balls in auto can be removed from the overpass. That's where they started, that big tall guy. When they are removed from the overpass, it's 8 points. But that's only in hybrid. So if you didn't get them down during auto, you didn't get the points for that. Each track ball that crosses the finish line in hybrid will earn, each track ball that crosses the finish line, like at the finish line level, so robot level, earns 2 points. Each one that did what was called a hurdle, which was to go over The overpass earned 8 points. It was 2 points for crossing the line and then a 6-point bonus for going over the overpass. And then balls that ended on the overpass earned a 12-point bonus. But as the video pointed out, you could de-score your opponent's track balls, and that was actually a very common strategy. So now that we've gone through the different point values, I want you guys to spend maybe 10 minutes talking in your small groups kind of about what you think about this game, your first thoughts, how you think, what metas you think you would develop, and then kind of like what you would lean towards wanting your robot to kind of focus on if you have a certain strategy that kind of floats to the top. So go ahead. So there is a flush game rule. You couldn't shut down, like you couldn't put 3 robots. That's a good question. You can only do one at a time. Yeah, if you had your own ball, you wouldn't even last that
What part of regulation? The part where it says you can't shoot with the case. I would assume
You're
just to like cue it off. Yeah.
That's it. That's a good plan.
Basically, what we do is we have we're going to try to do
Literally fire. The most literal thing. Under what jurisdiction?
Maybe not. I mean, valid point though. Under which jurisdiction? And I mean, essentially, you just look at the rule and find the
We're
loophole.
gonna know how many ones there are.
Yeah, that's what they have there right now. It was like a way to
No way.
It's the position of the ball.
He knows.
You didn't have a win.
He's psychopath.
I think the other option would be to throw it
No, we take one ball, we take two balls. Another ball,
Alright, I'm gonna give you guys like 2 more minutes and then we're gonna start discussing.
Get an actual card. Get an actual one.
Yeah, oh yeah. As long as you weren't intentionally shooting it out of the field, you were now granted, the ball is like over 3 feet wide.
Literally nobody does it. No, it wouldn't.
Alright, maybe start wrapping up your conversation. Then we're gonna start talking about the better
Shut up.
I think cheating the system is a pretty good idea. I mean, I put up that like last year, and Grace was like, you can't like say other things. I thought of lighting things on fire, like Grace was like, you can't just light everything on fire. That's not how this works. Everyone else loses in that. Alright, let's focus back in. Okay, what I'm going to ask is that if each table wants to go around and we'll kind of talk briefly about what was discussed. Do you guys want to start, or do you want to start over there? Or do you want to go
We'll start here.
We'll start here. Alright, let's start with you guys.
You said we'd do it, so do it.
Wait, what?
Yes.
Okay, so basically we were talking a lot about strategy, like what we thought they were going to be doing. So we talked about doing like the hybrid or the autonomous, that maybe the goal would just to be to get the ball off of level. And then we were talking about how during the actual match, whether or not the goal would be to throw it over or to just keep it on ground level and just push it around. That was basically all we were talking about.
Okay, so what were some thoughts about the benefits of maybe keeping it on the ground versus doing the hurdles?
One of the things that we talked about was if you had a robot that you were trying to get it over the hurdles, you might have a taller robot, and depending on how tall that is, I don't remember how tall the things were, but you might have
About
time.
8 feet, if I remember correctly.
You might have time that you might want to bring it down to get your robot to be faster, stop time that you have to lower your robot, so that it might be beneficial to not have a robot that threw it over and just brought it around.
Okay. All right. Any other thoughts? Yes. No. All right. Table in the back.
Okay, so we had a lot of really great ideas. In typical fashion, it's hard to kind of settle on anything in 5 minutes. So we decided that we needed a vehicle that was had a low profile for stability, a heavy base. We were thinking 4 motors with pneumatic wheels. Pneumatic wheels seem to be a little more sound in terms of sticking to the road and things of that nature. We also decided that we were going to use some kind of elevator, an elevator to necessarily knock the ball off, not necessarily
Put
keep
it
it
back
on. Right.
Yeah.
So with the stable base, the ability to get the balls off and or push them around the track, and the weight, that was pretty much sticking with what we could do out of the
Okay, so our design starts off by getting the ball down and into its possession through a 3-pronged device, sort of like this shape here, where it will go up with an elevator, take hold of the ball, take it and bring it down onto itself. It's a swerve drive, and from there our plan is to go around and around the track as quickly as possible before at the end of the match we will place the ball back up
So
on the
you're
top.
holding the ball the whole time, going
Yes.
around and around and around, and then putting it back up at the end.
Big brains.
Cool. And then, was this a different group?
No, the
Okay.
ball, they didn't design for us.
Nice. All right, and then you guys?
I should speak. Yeah, so we, me and Joe actually do know a little bit about this game, so we kind of use what we know, but a lot of consensus about the group is, you can get a lot of points from just doing laps. But then we compared the points and we're like, but you can get 10 points per lap if you're trying to lob it up. So we were planning on doing that. So we'd be trying to do as many laps as we could while also getting it over the top.
Nice.
That was our strategy.
Nice. So it sounds like a lot of people were prioritizing getting the ball down in hybrid and then doing laps with the ball, whether you are doing laps hurdling it or if you're just holding it the whole time and doing laps. That was kind of how a lot of teams broke down the game. One of the big snafus of this game is that, boy, when I tell you, hybrid was a lot harder than any of you would imagine. So basically, the fact that the location of the balls was randomized meant that if you had if you did not have a way to compensate for the fact that, if you started here and your ball was here and your opponent's ball was here, if you had a knock you off thing, pointy stick, and you were the Red Alliance and it was the Blue Alliance's ball that was there, your mechanism might work fantastically. It knocks that ball off the overpass every time. The problem is you just knocked off your opponent's ball and you scored them 8 points. So that's just one of the fun kind of challenges of this game. I thought what would be really fun is to discuss, I'm going to show you 5 robots. 3 of them are the World Championship Alliance from this year. I really like this World Championship Alliance because I think it's one of the best examples of a Championship Alliance of 3 robots that focused in and excelled at one specific aspect of the game that then came together to form kind of like an Uber alliance. So it's not an example of a game where all 3 of them look the same and they all do the same things. Each of the robots does a different thing, Yeah, you have a question.
Question. So was this before the world champions were like split up into teams?
Yes,
and
yes.
before-
This was long before they so there was one world championship. It was in Atlanta, Georgia. So that you will see in when I break it down, one of these teams is from Ontario, one is from Michigan, and one is from Texas. So it really was truly like a world championship. That's a great question. All right, so we're gonna start out with the captain of that alliance.
Knew it.
So this is Simba SS. This is probably, arguably, the greatest robot in the world that year. Simba SS is right up there with 254's 2018 bot and 71's 2002 robot as the most dominant robot in its particular year and so Simba SS is beautiful. It really is probably like one of the most breathtakingly simple but deadly effective robots I've ever seen. So it's a wheeled intake on a claw that's mounted to a single jointed arm. So that whole tower that the claw is attached to has a surgical tubing powered basically like linear punch. So they had a winch that sat at the bottom of their claw. It was powered by a globe motor, which we don't even use in FRC anymore. That's how old this game is. Basically what they would do is they didn't have the ability to knock the balls off the overpass. They didn't have the ability to place the balls at the end. But what they could do really, really well was hurdle. So in this game, on average, the average team in this game that tried to do hurdles could do 2 hurdles a game. Simba SS averaged 7 hurdles a match and peaked at 9. It was just insane how good it was at picking up the ball and then hurdling it. They were the captains of that championship winning alliance. They only lost 7 matches the entire official season. It was crazy. One of the things that they did exceptionally well is they actually did take a really good advantage of that hybrid period by focusing not on knocking down the balls, but rather on maximizing the number of laps that they could do in hybrid. Because if you guys remember, you got more points for crossing around the laps in hybrid than you got during the regular match. The next robot we're going to talk, so these guys are from Ontario. Next is the Thunder Chickens. Their robot was not also named SS. Sorry, that was a copy and paste error. I don't know what the Thunder Chickens robot is named that year. Thunder Chickens robot is actually very similar to the one that you guys talked about. Their whole idea was that they would knock the balls off the overpass in hybrid mode, and then they would hold the ball and kind of run around the field with it, and then at the end they would put it back on to the overpass to score the points. They had a really tall, this whole piece is a single jointed arm, and then this was this big PVC kind of gripper that sort of went around the ball and held it in place. It wasn't the best at hurdles, but it was really, really good at placing the ball. So they made the design decision that knocking the ball off at the beginning was 8 points, placing the ball back up at the end was 12. They were contributing 20 points to a match, and that on average was a higher contribution per match, even if they didn't do any laps, than most of the teams that played this year. They were the first pick on the alliance. They were, this was pre-Michigan being districts, but they won, I think it's the last year of the Detroit Regional. It was just, it wasn't the fastest robot on the field. It wasn't the best hurdler, but it was just really, really good at the aspects of the game that they chose to focus on. The last robot I'm going to talk about is the second pick on this alliance. It is my favorite robot of all time. I adore this robot. It is the Robo Wrangler's Tumbleweed. Has anybody seen this robot before? Just out of, yeah? Okay. So Tumbleweed is basically, Tumbleweed, oh, how to describe Tumbleweed. This picture doesn't do the scale justice of this robot. This robot is teeny tiny. It is probably this big, like, yeah. They basically decided,
There's no way.
yeah, basically that's what they did, Melissa. So what Robo Wranglers decided was they realized that there was a break-even point where if you could run laps quickly enough, it didn't matter if you could score an overpass, it didn't matter if you could hurdle, it didn't matter if you could place in the end. Because if you were scoring enough laps, you were doing just as well as a team that was struggling to score one of the other game objectives. So this guy was a little beast. It is one of the earliest examples of an effective swerve drive in FRC. It's what's called a crab swerve. Basically, all of the drive wheels were independently driven, but the modules rotating was all controlled by a central module. And that's kind of like, if you can see, you can kind of see the gear on one of the modules being driven by, I think they have like every motor that they could use all powering this drivetrain. If this was a bigger picture, it would show that they did actually have a pole that extended up from the robot, that what it would do is it would extend and it would hit the ball off for in hybrid to do the hybrid points. And then after that, it was just going as quickly as it could, and it would just run laps around the field. My last point is probably one of my favorite about this presentation. Overwhelmingly, FRC teams, and this is across the board, you can look at any game, we are always statistically worse at doing robots than we like to think we are, and that's across the board. So over 50% of FRC teams in 2008 could, I think I already said, the average was 2 hurdles. So that is, if you think about it, if you're scoring 2 hurdles, that's 16 points plus 4 points for going around twice. So that's 20 points. Tumbleweed could score 10 laps in a match. And 2 of those were in hybrid. Plus, they could hit the ball off in hybrid. So that's 8 plus 8, so 16, plus 18 more points for laps in a match. By focusing their energy on a much simpler design, by realizing that making the fastest, most agile robot they could, they were far more efficient as a lap bot than most teams that tried to be hurdlers. So I've always thought that this robot was a great example of, you don't need to do everything to excel in FRC. You need to pick one thing to do really, really well. So the next one we're going to look at is, I figured I would take somebody local, because I think it's fun to look at local teams that we all know. I almost did 341 because they were the captains of the winning alliance at Philly. But I figured that if you guys, I want to give you the ability to go home and ask about 341's robot that year. So I knew that Mo wasn't coming today, so I figured I would pick on them a little bit. So Mo was the first pick of the winning alliance at the Philadelphia Regional. They were primarily a hurdle bot. The cool thing about Mo's, though, was they used a lot of pneumatics to be able to actuate their claws so that they could kind of, if they ran their intake at like 20% speed at the right angle, they kind of would like lightly let the ball up, and maybe 40% of the time it would actually stay up on the overpass to get the 12-point bonus at the end. They prioritized hurdles over laps. But like I said, they could, in theory, place track balls at the end. One of the things that I like to point out about Mo's design and Simba SS is that they kind of pioneered wheel intakes. We're all really spoiled now in FRC. We all, for the most part, utilize wheeled intakes a lot whenever we have balls as game pieces now. That wasn't always the case. It was kind of knowing how to handle an object as large as the trackball was kind of a new challenge for a lot of teams. And a lot of teams' first thought was to grip it like this. And the teams that approached it by sacrificing one of the motors that they could be using somewhere else to run a wheeled intake really found that, oh, I'm really close on time, really found that they were doing it more efficiently than those who did not. All right, so I always like to pick on my team. So this is my baby. This is Fire Duck. Fire Duck is one of those teams that would fall into the category of we would have been better off building 148s. We prioritized hurdles and knocking down the balls from the overpass, but we did not have the programming chops to actually, handle hybrid mode effectively. So I was the programmer on my team that year. We knocked down our opponent's balls more times than I could count. So that's kind of real quickly like that. All right, I just want to get to this. So why did I pick this game for you guys today? So the reason is I wanted to get you guys thinking about the idea of finite cycles versus infinite cycles. So examples of games with finite cycles would be like last year or 2018 or this game, or not, sorry, 2011. Ones where the number of game pieces is limited and their scoring locations are fixed. So once you scored a piece, it was gone, it was done, it was finito. The game like 2008 had unlimited scoring potential. You could, the only limit on the number of cycles you could score was how much fast you could pick up the ball and carry it around. And I wanted you guys to think about, as an exercise to go home and think about, sort of what that does to the meta. When you have the potential to really have no upper bounds, how can you kind of use that to your advantage? I've listed a whole bunch of games here that are broken down into how that game plays out. And then why am I doing this? I don't know what the game is for 2020, but when I hear the name Infinite Recharge, I'm really hoping it's going to be a game where we have some type of recycled game piece where we're not limited in the scoring locations, because it really makes it for a really cool meta, and we are due for that. The last 3 games have been fixed game piece. So that's my presentation. Thank you guys. To finish off, I just want to say. Just to finish off, I want to say some acknowledgments because, like I said, at the beginning, I'm not an expert in this. Everything I've learned from other people. These are some fantastic mentors who live in other regions of the country who are kind enough to publish their thoughts on these subjects online. So if I'm going to make sure that this slide deck is available on LC's website, if you want to take the time to go and read through some of the effective first strategies that are published above, it really does help to be able to learn from other successful teams. All right, thanks guys.